Living under these conditions is objectively traumatic, regardless of who you are or where you
My mom always said I was a nervous baby because even as an infant, I would unravel the edges of all of my blankets in my crib. And I didn't think about it too much until I started learning about epigenetics. And the way that I have heard epigenetics framed is basically trauma to the lineage that changes the DNA of offspring down the line. The first time I was exposed to it was talking about famine and how a couple generations later, the lineage, they stored fat more effectively in their body. Now, in trying to unravel all of this, I inevitably ended up going back through and looking at the patterns that were running in my family. Patterns that seemed outside of the norm: addiction, slewer slide, things like that. But over the years, I have come to see those things as a coping mechanism for the conditions we live in and not being able to handle stress that is coming in. Now, as a person, I have been trying to make sure that I'm not doing cultural appropriation when I am doing spiritual practices, and I have heard rightly that don't have their own culture. So I tried to look up Prussian mythology. Now, as it turns out, there's not much left because Prussia no longer exists because of Nazi colonization. Most epigenetic stuff I have seen so far discusses biological changes. However, I started thinking about the possibility of epigenetics also creating changes to behaviors, and if nervous system dysregulation could be inherited, if trauma to the nervous system can be passed down. As a collective, I think that there are some behavioral modifications from the 20s and Great Depression era, and that scarcity in food and resources, I think that has manifested as a behavioral adaptation of hoarding in more of the boomer generation. Hoarding of power, wealth, resources. And looking at the time frame when my ancestors came to the United States, everybody thinks going to America to seek out a better life. Was it that? Or was it our ancestors fleeing from G-slide or other forms of persecution? Because it makes sense that a bunch of people with fucked up nervous systems probably come from a lineage where nowhere ever felt safe and you felt like you were constantly in danger. And the possibility that you may have inherited hypervigilance from your ancestors fleeing. Now, the way that manifests today makes a lot of sense with social anxiety. If you're trying to keep to yourself, you don't know who is a safe person around you. With a lot of loss and transience in their lives, epigenetically, it would make sense to have a culture of people who are hyper-independent, who may have social anxiety because you don't know who to trust, or you've seen so much loss that you detach from connection as to almost avert the pain. Maybe having some abandonment issues of everybody that I love leaves me. And after World War II, there was a move away from multi-generational housing to the suburbia, living the American dream, husband, wife, 2.5 kids, white picket fence, everybody has their own house, their own car, their own whatever. So the ideals and policies that emerged out of that time cultivated the culture of rugged individualism. So not only did we become required to participate in the system in order to get our needs met, but losing our villages made us so that we didn't know how to fucking interact with people. We don't have great community, emotional, social, or relational skills. In a lot of non-cultures, they are a lot better at building community. One of the benefits of community, though, that isn't talked about enough is how co-regulating with somebody else's nervous system can help regulate your own nervous system when other things just aren't fucking doing the job. And I think to get a better view of what's at the root of, we need to expand the discussion a little bit. Because yes, all of those behaviors that we are displaying are not in support of building community. And in order to change a behavior, being able to really understand what is at the root of it feels like it will be more helpful for us to be able to yank it out by its root. I haven't really seen people talking much about epigenetic behavioral adaptations, so this is kind of theorizing. And it seems like there is a divide probably somewhere amongst the spectrum-y folks between people who have been here a while and may have been part of the colonizing and those of us who came here to flee persecution from another form of colonizing. And I wonder how many second or third generation European Americans are here in this country who don't realize that they're here because of that. I also know that my great-grandmother was known as the town witch, and there was some black sheep persecution that happened there. There are a ton of other contributing factors, like taking away arts and theater and music programs in schools, which are all ways to help rewire your neural pathways so you're not being driven from fear, and it helps regulate your nervous system through things like play, imagination, but that's for another time. What I am curious about is what other patterns we might be running as a collective that haven't been brought into our conscious awareness that might help us develop a plan for how to yank this stuff out by the roots. Because shame and blame has a tendency to shut people down even further, and even if it does get them to create a change, usually that doesn't lead to long-term sustained behavior change. What other patterns might be floating around in the lineage in our country?